Well, hello, happy Monday, and welcome to 10 Best Practices for Hybrid Cloud Backup. Today's exciting webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I am thrilled to be your moderator for this webinar because not only do we have a super interesting topic, we have two seriously awesome presenters here with us who are going to walk us through an interactive conversation all about hybrid cloud backup. So if you have been struggling with the complexities of security and backup strategies and approaches across all the various cloud environments, you are not alone in that. There's a lot to think about, and today we're going to get some insight into the importance of employing purpose-built backup and recovery that's native to your environment and allowing you to centrally manage and retain control of your data. Now, here is one of the best parts. Our expert speakers want the conversation today to be all about you. We're going to dig into some research, some customer use cases, and explore some of your own experiences. Our plan is to keep things interactive and conversational, and you get to be in the driver's seat along with our speakers here. So if you want to dig into a specific topic, you want to hear more about one issue or another, you want to clarify ideas and information, discuss something that's been on your mind, just ask. Now, I don't want to take a single minute away from all of the fun and excitement that's coming our way. So I'm going to just zip through a few of the important housekeeping points and get us on our way. All right, so first, we're going to take a little guided tour of your audience console together this morning. So first, what I want to do is point out the questions section of your webinar console, because everything I was just explaining about this engaging and conversation style webinar, well, it really depends on all of you out there getting involved. So I want you to post your questions, your experiences, your comments, topic ideas, whatever you have in mind, we want to hear it. And all of that happens inside that handy dandy questions window on your audience console. So find that tab right now and let's give it a little test run. You can start out by saying hi and hello, giving a wave to the community out there with you today. All right, now a quick side note, that questions window is also the best place to reach out and let us know if you do have any technical issues during our session today. Knock on wood, of course. But if you are getting any little Monday gremlins in your audience console today, don't forget that a browser refresh is probably going to clear that out and take care of any of the more common tech issues. But if not, just shoot a message in that questions tab to the Actual Tech Media crew, and we will be there to help you out. Okay, the next thing I want to point out to you is the handout section. It's right there next to the questions tab. So if you were just looking at that questions tab, you're going to head on over one to the left to the handouts tab. Now, the reason I'm really emphasizing this today is because there is some very exciting content to go along with our webinar that is so worth downloading and saving for after we wrap, including one of my favorites, the hybrid cloud backup for dummies. Who doesn't love that? Plus, you can get the 2023 Cloud Protection Trends Report, the #1 Hybrid Cloud Backup Guide, the MIT Technology Review e-brief, Hybrid Cloud Wins Rely and Data Protection, and the 451 Research Report, Veeam Build Momentum of Cloud and SaaS Backup Growth. Just jam-packed with information. So head on over to that handouts tab, click in, make sure that you've downloaded those resources and have them saved for after we wrap our webinar today. Now, it is not just awesome content that we are giving away. We also have a $300 Amazon gift card as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. Now, if you've been on these before, you've heard me say this, I'm going to remind you again, you must be here in live attendance in order to qualify to win any of our prizes. And all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you're not sure what those are, head on back over to that handouts tab that we were just chatting about, click in, scroll down to the very bottom, and you can find the full T's and C's waiting for you there. Okay, now not only does asking a question today help steer the conversation and bring up the overall excitement of the whole webinar, it's also a great chance to win a prize because today we're offering a $50 Amazon gift card to the best question asked. Now, I do want to let you know that we're actually reviewing all of the questions that are asked after we wrap. So even if your question does not get asked live, if we don't get a chance to dig into it with our speakers, don't worry because there's still a chance to win. So keep those questions coming in throughout the session today because, hey, it gets the conversation rolling. It brings up the whole energy of the event. And also, you might just win a $50 Amazon gift card. So win-win all around. All right, folks. Well, I think that's enough of the housekeeping and background info. I think we're about ready to move into our webinar. And I am so excited to introduce you all to our two expert speakers today. We're going to be hearing from Leah Troscianecki, Principal PMM for Microsoft Azure Solutions at Veeam, and Sam Nicholls, Director Public Cloud Product Marketing at Veeam. So let's get both of them on out here with us. Leah and Sam, I can't wait to get this conversation rolling today. I know you've got a lot of content to cover. So Sam, I'm going to hand the mic right on over to you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that wonderful welcome, Jess, and a big thanks to the audience for joining us today. I can already see a number of hellos from kind of all across North America. So hello to everyone. Mike, hello from cold Edmonton. I'm in Minneapolis. It's also cold here. It's going to be cold for a long time, but hey ho, at least it's not bug season. Actually, we've got some folks from the UK as well, which is my my homeland. So greetings to everyone. I also see a question already come in from Satya. I'm asking about hybrid cloud security challenges. So I just want to preemptively state that yes, we will have a security theme within what Leah and I are talking about. So after we get to that security piece, if there are any further questions that you have, Satya, please post those in the chat and we'll be sure to get to those. But without further ado, before we go through these 10 best practices, Lee and I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to just kind of walk you guys through some of the trends that we are seeing, not just in the cloud, but across hybrid cloud, right? After all, that's what we're talking about today. And this is from our most recent version of Veeam's Data Protection Trends Report. This is, I believe, its third iteration now, with the fourth coming early next year. And really kind of breaking down what you can see on the screen here is this pretty gradual decline of physical server utilization within the data center. It certainly looks like there is a decline on the virtual machines on hosts within the data center, although I would like to add here that we do see that remaining actually relatively flat and static. What we're actually seeing is just that dilution due to what we see on the right, which is this hockey stick in adoption of cloud-hosted virtual machines within either a hyperscale provider like AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, or even a more localized sovereign service provider within your region, country, state, whatever it might be. So what this ultimately leads us with is a hybrid environment, right? And the public cloud is certainly outpacing the private adoption piece. 16% of organizations are 100% sole sourced on public cloud only now, whereas only 4% on a private cloud or data center only. The vast majority of folks are in that hybrid cloud arena. On the right-hand side, you'll see more than 50% of enterprise data and workloads are going to live within that public cloud in the next 12 months. And for the SMB, that number is actually more than 66%. Now, one of the common misconceptions that we often hear is that this hybrid cloud state that we're in right now is just a temporary state, where it is just, we're in process of migrating our workloads to the cloud. The cloud is now the de facto standard for all of our net new workloads. And then eventually the data center is going to be deprecated. I don't think that that's actually where we're going to land up. I think we're going to stay in this hybrid cloud region because what we see is the public cloud is very, very good at certain things. And the data center is very, very good at certain things that the cloud might not be so good at. So certain workloads, applications, data sets make sense to live in the cloud, especially if we're dealing with like the agility of applications, but maybe more sensitive information. Or workloads that have a very, very low latency demand are probably going to remain in the data center because we have full control of that architecture, performance, so on and so forth. So, Leah, why don't you walk us through the next few slides here? Are you with us, Leah? Or is it me? We are live, guys.
Leah, I think you might be muted. I'm seeing your microphone button is muted.
Well, while Leah's figuring out any sort of technical difficulties that she might have, I do always make fun of Leah for working on a Microsoft machine, so this is probably why. It's typically these sorts of...
No, it's not. It's not a Windows issue. This is a Columbus, Ohio internet service provider issue, Sam. But hey, guys, typically, at least you know it's live, right?
Right. Yeah. Typically, it's me having the ones like I refuse to use anything but Mac, and I'm usually the one with issues. So I'm just glad that it wasn't me for a change, and I'm going to jump right on that, Leah. But I'm sure these guys don't want to hear about our TIFF. Why don't you talk to us about workload moving to the cloud and potentially back again?
Absolutely. And certainly a lot of that is really about taking a look at the hard facts of the last few years of why a workload is moving to the cloud and frankly, why it may not work in the cloud. So one of the first questions that we've been asking for a long time in our Cloud Protection Trends Report survey, and again, this is a survey of many organizations around the world, not just Veeam users. And we asked them, when you're looking at putting a workload in the cloud, what was the origination of that workload? Is this some sort of transformation from a bare metal server? Were you already in some sort of virtualization environment and you're simply porting that to the cloud? Or is this a cloud first net new workload initiative? And the answer is all of the above. And that's actually kind of surprising. I think when we talk with a lot of organizations, you hear the word cloud first. That tends to be a great buzzword to use in a shorthand. But what we're finding is that given a lot of market factors, whether it is taking a look at VMware contracts, whether that's taking a look at the fact that it's incredibly challenging to even buy a server today from any of the resellers or retailers alike, it's probably likely that a lot of these workloads are having to rapidly move to the cloud because of on-premises constraints. And when they get there, gosh, it's not always rainbows and butterflies here. So part of that is taking a look at why would somebody move a workload from the cloud back to on-premises? And we've, again, been asking this question for several years, but this particular year, the answers were radically different than any year past. If you look in that third column there, yes, we migrated from on-premises to a cloud, but then decided to bring it back on-premises. That answer was so much higher this year than any year that we've asked this question. And we really had to sit down as a Veeam team and say, what does this mean? This is a pretty rapid change. Why do we think that is, and how can we help these organizations? And what we did is asked around. We asked a lot of our systems engineers, we asked tech support, what examples have you heard of organizations needing to move a workload from the cloud back to on-premises? And it's a lot of lift and shift rapidly without really right-sizing the workload. This could be a latency issue. It could be that it didn't port well into a VM. It could be that they tried to move to a platform as a service, and ultimately that wasn't successful. So this concept of workloads needing to be mobile and the cloud not being this monolithic, perfect solution has really been kicking around in our heads quite a bit. And so as we look at the research today, and also when we transition into some of the best practices that we're going to highlight, we've really allowed these two charts to inform a lot of our talk track. But before we get to those best practices, let's talk a little bit about different kinds of backup. So when we're looking at backup of the cloud, again, this term that gets used as a monolithic fashion, but in fact is quite different. We ask more recently in this research, are you just backing up VMs? Are you just backing up something like EC2? Or are you backing up actual databases? Because the function of backup and the function of recovery can be quite different depending on if it's infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. And the answers that we got across clouds were pretty similar. Yes, we're running databases within a server instance as a VM. Or, hey, I'm actually using platform as a service. I'm using SQL, Oracle, DynamoDB. Again, the same thing applies on the Azure side of things. And so again, as a Veeam team, we're really thinking critically about how these workloads are transforming, and it changes the backup and recovery functions that we have. And Sam, I think that also applies to file shares too, right?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So we've got the data here from that very same Cloud Protection Trends report showing from a platform as a service file shares perspective. This is specifically on AWS. Again, we're actually seeing more often than not file shares actually being run on Amazon EC2, right? Just a virtual machine, just as we may do on premises. And it's not as big of a gap as we saw with databases, but the folks actually choosing to run native file shares within AWS is certainly lower than that. So I think that speaks to a lot about what you were discussing earlier, Leah, around lift and shift, folks not necessarily truly architecting for the cloud and going 100% cloud native. But I think those folks are certainly they're in the throes of that. And as we kind of refresh this question next year, it'll be really interesting to see the trend there. And certainly the same goes for Azure. We even asked about OneDrive here, but looking at the specific file shares hosted on Azure, like Azure Files, there is slightly more of a gap there. One of the things that I do want to go back to, and this is a good question that was asked by, I'm sorry if I butcher your name, Yolanta, which is around like how are the power fluctuations influencing the infrastructure and how can it be protected? Which is a really, really good question to ask in this kind of economic situation the world finds itself in at this point of time. And it really kind of goes back to Leah's first set of slides, which is really around the need for flexibility, fluidity, portability, being able to place your workloads where it best suits the needs of your business at that point in time. And from a protection standpoint, you don't ever want backup and recovery to be a hindrance to you accelerating the utilization of one technology and migrating off of an old platform. So that's kind of what I would add in there. Let's have a look, see if there's any more questions while we're going. Some more security questions. We will get to those in a bit, Anati. Mike also asked, what's the top issue to avoid when migrating workloads like backups to the cloud? Fantastic question. I think, you've got to look at pretty much everything that you would for a regular application. You've got to look at performance, cost, security. And again, myself and Leah will cover those in the next few slides there. So this next slide is all about, okay, we've discussed the hybridity of environments, not just data center and in the cloud, but just like the differences of workloads running in the cloud. Again, a file share, a database living on a virtual machine in a more traditional kind of monolithic application structure, or something that's kind of veering more towards that cloud native approach, running on platform as a service as reference data that's powering some sort of like serverless or microservice application. But when it comes to backup, specifically of those platforms as a service, we're looking at, well, we asked the question, how are you using that right now? And the vast majority of organizations, almost 80%, are saying that we back up those cloud hosts as database with a specific backup tool. And only a very few number of folks are not currently backing up their data. I believe that's 15% right there that are saying doesn't either have data that needs to be backed up or believe that their databases are natively durable, so don't need to be backed up. But the vast majority of folks realize, hey, it's our data, it's our responsibility to protect it, and we need to do so. And platform as a service really does start to introduce some interesting nuances when it comes to data protection, because I think a lot of folks that are moving to the cloud are saying, hey, it was a physical or a virtual machine on premises. We're throwing it on a virtual machine in the cloud, infrastructure as a service. And we're just going to continue to use the same approach to protect that, which might be an agent-based approach. And you know what? If that fits the bill for you, great. But when it comes to things like platform as a service, software as a service, agents don't work. There is nowhere to install an agent, because we don't have visibility to that platform because it's platform as a service. So there is no way to back that up with an agent. We need to start looking at more native purpose-built tool sets for that. And the same absolutely goes for Microsoft 365 here as well. Great question. Does your organization backup data within Microsoft Office 365? Vast majority of folks do realize that, yes, it's our data, our responsibility to protect it, and this is how they are doing it. Now, this is talking about how. Leah, why don't you walk us through who when it comes to backup of cloud workloads?
And this is such an important piece of research that, again, as a Veeam team, we've spent a lot of time talking about. In the history of Veeam, and certainly in the history of the backup space in general, we typically have had one key set of stakeholders to talk to, and that's the data protection team. Security has always been sort of on the fringes. Occasionally we might talk to a DBA, but overall our main persona that we've always talked to has been the data protection team. And that has dramatically changed in the last few years for two, I think, key reasons. The first is, of course, as workloads move to the cloud, and perhaps clunkily so, moving to the cloud, moving to SaaS, moving to PaaS, the plane of management has dramatically increased to the point that a lot of gaps in strategy are happening. And then you have the really prevalent threat of cybersecurity attacks becoming a sort of omnipresent way of life for us. And that means that we can no longer treat backup and treat ultimately security as a second-class citizen within the IT space. That means that when we've been looking at anything from who gets involved in the actual backups, when we analyze tech support cases, when we take a look at our sales teams and our resellers and asking them, hey, who has been involved in the purchasing decisions over the last few years? The number of people coming to the table has dramatically changed. And that became really obvious too when we did this research. What we're finding now is who gets involved in data protection has really become a multi-person team, if you will. So whoever owns that piece of the infrastructure, whether it's the data center team, whether it's the AWS engineers, whether it's the M365 administrator, they need to be a really important part of this equation. Backup, that becomes the quarterback of this team. Security, they're an important influencer. This may even now involve legal, finance. We're going to talk a lot about cost control in our best practices section. Because of the cloud economics associated with, managing certainly a normal cloud infrastructure. But when you add backup into that, it's really easy for costs to sort of balloon if you're not careful. So we're finding a lot of people are brought into the equation. And we're going to talk a bit in our best practices about how you manage that effectively. How do you bring people into the fold? How do you give them the right level of access? How do you maybe use reporting to keep a sort of general understanding of what's going on with your data protection plan. But at the end of the day, this cannot be one person's job anymore. This cannot be a sort of role that's a thankless job that somebody has to take on. It's now an imperative that it becomes everybody's job. And we're actually seeing those changes. So if you're looking at your organization and thinking, gosh, it's only one or two people's jobs right now, you might be a little bit behind what's been changing in the market. And I think this data is a good way to look at that. But again, we'll talk about more strategies of how to pull folks into that fold as well. But before we get into those best practices, Sam, I think we wanted to just kick things off with a few challenges to keep top of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So, data protection is really struggling as these organizations, including your own that you guys work for. As you guys are rapidly evolving to having this hybrid cloud infrastructure, the legacy tools, the current tools that you have in place that are working to protect your infrastructure on premises might not necessarily scale into the cloud. It doesn't necessarily succeed with modern applications in the cloud. We kind of discussed that whole PaaS piece a moment ago, and they don't necessarily do very well at defending against cyber threats, especially in the cloud. I think that there is this common misconception that the cloud is less secure than on premises. I would argue that they are equally secure. In fact, I would argue that it is actually easier to architect more secure environments within the cloud than it might be on premises. The same principles apply. It's just nomenclature, technologies differ. And again, Leah and myself will get into that in a little bit. So what that's ultimately forcing folks to do is, as they go on this cloud journey and start to migrate lift and shift workloads into the cloud and instantiate any new applications in the cloud, they start to go towards a platform or utilize a platform native data protection approach. And that has its benefits, being native. And again, we'll discuss that in a little bit. But those platform native approaches are specifically limited to an individual platform or cloud. They can be sometimes somewhat restrictive or feature lacking, especially if they're not from a tried and tested backup company. It's just kind of like a first party solution. And it also strips users, control of their data. They want to keep that data within that cloud. And now you lack the ability to move that data elsewhere. So ultimately what we're seeing is organizations have on average 3 data protection tool sets to manage, sometimes as much as 7. And that is an absolute pain in the butt to manage, right? I can't imagine having all of these disparate policies, different user interfaces, different capabilities, different logins to manage as a backup admin. And I'm sure you guys don't want to have to do that either. So, the ultimately the challenges are not all backup is created equal. There are certain backup tool sets that are good for protecting one environment, but not necessarily another. So going with that platform native approach is critical, but also having that siloed management that is commonly a result of that is an absolute nightmare to manage. It's incredibly complex. It's not very efficient. It's very resource intensive on us as humans trying to manage that. It's resource intensive in terms of costs as well. The fact that it is platform native and typically only for that platform also strips us of control. Right, we are in a mobility discussion right now, moving workloads from on-premises to the cloud. But what happens if corporate directives change or a new service is spun up in another cloud that we don't have on our current one today, and I want to move to that cloud? Being stripped of that control is ultimately going to hinder any sort of transformative initiatives that we have. And then finally, the unaccommodating solutions piece as well. This is actually namely around licensing and the nightmare that managing all of these different licenses and the cost that's associated with that is. So without further ado, Leah, let's start to turn to look at some of these best practices. And I will let you go first with assembling your team with your superhero picture. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like I said earlier, I think that we're really seeing a tremendous change in the industry just over the last few years in who is getting involved in data protection. So I gave a kind of precursor to this. You can see it now in a sort of checklist format. Our number one piece of advice is to involve each member of the infrastructure team. So if you're talking about backup of the data center, those folks should be involved. If we're talking about backup of an application, whether that's a container-based app or an app that's running in platform as a service, an app that's running on a VM, an app that's in a SaaS solution like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce, they all need to be involved. And then on the actual cloud side of things, I actually think it really applies to all of the main kinds of personas, whether that's the architects. I've seen some questions in here that we'll get to around best practices of cloud storage. Does it make sense to have backups living in the cloud? Do we need to talk about moving around within the cloud to other regions and subscriptions? Do we even need to have a backup on premises? A lot of those are architectural questions, but then you have to execute the engineering piece of it. How does this all impact our current cloud environment? Are there integrations that we need to set up with third-party solutions? And then the admin on the day-to-day basis, do they have the right level of access to perform a restore? We're going to talk about a lot of that throughout these best practices, so keep these sorts of personas in mind. I also mentioned that I think there's a lot of influencers when you're looking at your data protection strategy. Security should absolutely be involved in this conversation. And in fact, again, we're seeing them much more involved, not only in the sales process, but also interacting with the product itself and trying to better understand how backup fits in to a broader security strategy, whether that's identity and access management, making sure all the best practices are there, whether that's having a last line of defense, some sort of secure backup. And we'll talk more about that in a bit, because of course we have a whole set of best practices that we recommend around security. Something big that we'll talk about is roles and responsibilities. If it's everybody's job, then it's nobody's job. And so having a sort of ROE, a rules of engagement around who is responsible for making sure that things are backed up, who can perform certain kinds of recovery, who is involved in integration, automation, day two operations. Those are all big things to think about. And then finally, one other best practices that we really like to recommend is around a culture of tagging. So making sure that everybody is involved in tagging workloads, naming them with the sort of correct nomenclature. And every organization has different naming conventions, but that will help down the road when it comes to reporting and testing, making sure you have the right level of coverage. So those are just some great ways to think about assembling the team and ultimately making sure you have the appropriate coverage involved in data protection. But let's get back to some basics here. What's fun about us being on the cloud team is we get to talk about what us on the backup side would consider to be basics, and that's kind of fun for us because I get to sit here and actually define what an RPO and an RTO is. So for those who don't know on the call, and if you guys are backup experts on the call, please feel free to glaze over. But but for anybody who maybe does backup as a hobby because you're the AWS engineer or the Azure admin, this is a good opportunity to learn some basics of backup. So a recovery point objective is the point in time at which you need to have a backup available. Said differently, what's my tolerance for how much data I could lose because I don't have a backup? And that definition is going to be dictated by a few things. First is identify what the big bad wolves here are. Is there an opportunity for accidental deletion? And if so, what might that look like? If somebody deletes an email, do I need that email available within a minute? Maybe not. But if this is a really important database and somebody deletes an entire set of files within that, that might be a really significant big bad wolf that you need to account for in your RPOs. Are we looking at ransomware infection? How much of your data could you really do without if ransomware infects your environment and you don't have a backup to recover from for an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours worth of data? Really thinking about how long could you live without that in that scenario. And then the reality is sometimes the cloud does go down. As high availability as it is architected, it is possible for there to be some level of downtime. So really looking at your recovery point objectives and your recovery time objectives, how long will it take you to recover in any given scenario can be really helpful. And ultimately, a lot of that comes down to really looking at the organizational needs. So that might be talking with finance, talking with legal, thinking about your customer's experience. If you are an e-commerce company and your website goes down, that tolerance is very minimal. But if it's a server that you only use every couple of hours, maybe that tolerance is really high. Those are all some things to consider and really important as you then flush through the rest of the best practices. So with that, Sam, I'm going to turn it back to you so that we can talk a little bit about different kinds of backup, and in particular, what we mean by a native backup solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into those, I mean, guys, we've got a ton of questions coming in, so please do keep them coming. I do want to take some time just to answer some ones that have stood out here. So the first question from Heath is real-time replication across multiple cloud locations an adequate substitute for backups in some situations? If so, what would those be? Fantastic question, Heath. I mean, you certainly sound familiar with the cloud. And here I would reference the well-architected framework. And it really ties in nicely with what Leah was talking about understanding what your tolerance for downtime is. The real-time replication that we can architect within the cloud, I'm going to use Azure as an example and call region pairs, can give us up to 99.9, it's 11 nines of availability. I mean, that translates to literally minutes of downtime every single year. And to do that on premises would be massively difficult. And that helps the cloud be, again, incredibly available, incredibly resilient, incredibly durable. But we're still kind of tied to the drawbacks of the replication that is powering that availability. So if there were to be some sort of cause for data loss or outage at that source target, so let's just, source destination, let's say it was a cybersecurity event, maybe it was accidental deletion, maybe the data just went corrupted, that is going to instantly be copied over to wherever that target might be. So both copies of that data are going to fall privy to that outage. And this is why you need the backup, because the backup is there as an independent copy of that data, whereby you can go back to different points in time to where that file was not corrupted, it was not infected, it had not been deleted, and recover it. So we're not advocating for backup replacing the durability that you can architect within the cloud. What we're saying is the they really go hand in hand. They are complementary to one another. And it's really about understanding how critical is this application? How much data can I afford to lose? And how quickly do I have to get back online? And really kind of tier out your applications 0, 1, 2, and whatever it might be, and apply the right data protection methods and practices to that meet those service level objectives without blowing out your budget. It would be nice to do it for everything. If you have the budget, I'm sure everyone on this call would probably be jealous. But fantastic question. Thank you, Heath. Don asks, do you guys now have a way to log into Microsoft 365 from Veeam for using two-factor authentication? Yes, we absolutely do. Heath also asks, are there any advantages, disadvantages to keeping a physical... where'd the question go? I've lost it. I know what the question premise was. It might just not be word for word, but keeping a copy of a backup on premises versus just in the cloud. So fantastic question. The advantages of that, I would say, are you are not beholden to just data within that cloud. So if there were to ever be a region that experienced an outage, you're ultimately, if production is run in that region and backups are stored in that region, you're not going to be able to recover anyway, even to another region, because the backup's in the region that's gone down to. So having a copy on premises certainly gives you more control. It gives you more recovery options, not just to that same cloud, but you could recover it on premises. You could recover it to another cloud if you wanted to. The pitfalls, the disadvantage of that are egress fees. The cloud providers, all of them will charge you egress fees for data that you take out of the cloud, even if that is copying a backup that primarily lives in object storage in the cloud, and you are copying that to a repository on premises. So I would just say be cognizant of those egress fees. Maybe not necessarily do it for every single backup. Maybe do a backup copy every week or 2 weeks, and that will help keep that lower while still giving you complete ownership and control over your data. And should the worst happen, the most flexibility when it comes to recovery. All right, that's those questions. So let's discuss evaluating native solutions for your cloud. So the first one is around considering the time and effort an agent-based solution will take to manage at scale. Yes, can agents protect workloads running within the cloud? They absolutely can. We spoke about limitations earlier. For virtual machines, infrastructure as a service, whether that's EC2, whether that's Azure VMs, Compute Engine VMs, and Google Cloud, you can take an agent-based approach. But as you start to scale that out, start to think about the impacts that will have downstream on the workload, because you are ultimately going to be eating into the bandwidth of that, and you might have to either kind of allocate more RAM, more compute, more storage to that workload to compensate for that, which is ultimately going to cost you more. Also, just deploying agents on hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of machines is going to become pretty problematic. And then it's just a resource intensive. It's more resource intensive on you. So just, is there a place for agents? Absolutely, especially when we look at very application-specific agents, like for your common off-the-shelf software. Let's call it Oracle databases. Those stood out to me earlier. If that's living on a virtual machine on a cloud workload, it might be good for you to take an agent-based approach to protect that, just because you can go with things like application-aware processing. Next up is examining data loss tolerance with native solutions offering application consistency. You can achieve application consistency with native solutions. You can do that with like Microsoft VSS. You can do pre and post scripts for things like Linux. But that application-aware processing is ultimately going to be better with an agent-based approach. But the native tool is ultimately leveraging native technologies to that cloud, native snapshots, native security, native storage. And that is ultimately going to help you get best-in-class protection while also optimizing for costs, performance as well. And then maximizing your investments with cloud native solution support for other cloud services. So this is starting to air into the security side of things. I mentioned native security, a backup solution that is aware of the environment that it is protecting, that is built for the environment that is protecting, that is able to leverage APIs presented by that cloud provider specific to security, like immutability, like key management service, or Key Vault in Azure terms, like integrating with identity and access management protocols to broker connections across different accounts, subscription, or regions, is ultimately going to give you the best-in-class coverage for your cloud native workload. So always use a tool that is native to the workload you're trying to protect, whether that is physical or virtual on premises, whether it is an IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS solution in the cloud, maybe even containerized. The way that we back up containers is very, very different to the way that we do for other workloads. Always utilizing the native solution is ultimately going to give you the best protection. Leah, do you want to talk about the downside of that, which is traditionally multiple point products, and how we can overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at managing across point products, it can be really challenging to get, I'm going to use a buzzword here now, a single pane of glass. But actually, I think that that's a really nice way of thinking of it. How would I answer the question to, let's say, a chief information security officer? Are all of our backups recoverable in the event of a ransomware attack? Or if not all, what percentage of them would be? If I can't answer that question with confidence because I have multiple point products and I don't have that report readily available, maybe I haven't even tested it, maybe I haven't even thought about it, gosh, then maybe that's too many solutions to manage. And ultimately, I think when we're looking at the needs of an IT team, the hope is that backup is something that you spend some time to set up well. You evaluate every once in a while to make sure that it continues to be implemented with best practices. But ultimately, we want it to be a set and forget sort of environment. And that really, that sort of confidence comes from centralized management. So ultimately, can I answer questions about whether or not my solution meets the needs of the organization? I can only do that if I've got one solution confidently. If I need to evaluate tools for scale and management and reporting, yes, a lot of those point products probably do have reporting. Yes, they probably do have APIs, but that's a lot of time management, again, for architecture teams, engineering teams, to try to figure out. One solution might be the best approach for those workloads. But in order to make sure that you can do that with one solution, I think, Sam, a really important thing to think about would be managing hybrid environments. Because I know you spent some great time talking about the research before and how this level of hybridity is going to continue to be the reality. I don't think 100% of workloads will ever move to the cloud. And as we saw with that research before about workloads needing to move from the cloud back to on-premises, I think this idea of hybridity and portability is here to stay and something to be considered within a data protection strategy. So, Sam, why don't you take this one?
If I can find the come off mute button. So considering hybridity and portability.
Obviously, it's a very small button. So
I typically like to double mute myself as well, backup
yes.
policy and all that. It's the industry we live and breathe. But considering hybridity and portability, you just touched on it now, and you definitely dove into it more in depth earlier on. But it's really just looking at, does the solution that I'm selecting support my strategy now? And does it support the strategy that I'm going to have in the future? So, we discussed a little bit earlier about, the way that you protect something in the cloud is different to the way that you do it on premises. If I don't have a way to purposefully back up that workload in the cloud, is that solution going to hinder my adoption of moving to the cloud? And, data protection should not be something that stops you from moving to the cloud. And this is one of the reasons why I love working for Veeam. I love the solution set that we have, because we are the least prescriptive vendor out there when it comes to where you put your data. Our mantra is, hey, let's just create a backup tool, a backup solution for all of these different common environments that our users have. We started off with vSphere virtualized environments. We branched that out to Hyper-V. Then, due to a massive demand from our user base, they wanted physical backup. So we do that for with agents for Windows, Linux, Unix, Mac. We support enterprise applications. We support all of the major hyperscale public cloud providers, including AWS, and that includes VMs, databases, file shares. Same for Azure, same for Google Cloud. And then another question that's come in, does Veeam support containers? Yes, we made an acquisition of Kasten, it was 2 years ago now, time flies. But Kasten allows us to protect those containerized workloads that are managed by Kubernetes. So we have a native tool set for all of these, and the vast majority of them share something called the Veeam Universal License. And the Veeam Universal License is a licensing mechanism that is essentially one unit that can be applied to any workload. So if you have an Oracle database that is living on premises and you decide to lift and shift that to, let's just say, AWS, you're not going to have to pick up the phone, call Veeam and say, hey, I've moved it to AWS. I need a new solution to protect that. I also need to procure a new license and deprecate my old one, whatever it might be. Just move the workload. And by the way, you can do that with Veeam technology as well. And the license is just going to intelligently follow it. You don't have to do any sort of license administration or management. You don't have to procure anything else. And then in the future, if you want to start architecting that workload to be more cloud native, you don't want it running as an Oracle database on a VM anymore. You want it to be Oracle on RDS, a platform as a service piece. Migrate the workload to RDS and use the same solution, the same license to protect that. It's really around letting you guys do what it is that you want to do with your data at any point in time by giving you the technology and licensing schema to do that. So you're not locked into any specific platform and that you always have the freedom to do what it is that you need to do. All right, on to the next one, which is around cybersecurity. And I know that there has been a lot of question around this. Just having a look at the questions. Kirk, does Veeam support Nutanix? Yes, absolutely, we do. Satyam, nice explanation on hybridity and portability. Thank you very much. But let's talk about the security piece. So Leah mentioned earlier that, data protection is or should be a part of any cybersecurity strategy. There was a question, I forget who asked it earlier on, which was is Veeam positioning itself as a security company? No, we are certainly not making that over rotation like a number of other vendors are doing to position ourselves as a cybersecurity company. We are a data protection company, and we understand that data protection, backup, and recovery are let's just call them first-class citizen of any robust, comprehensive cybersecurity strategy. When we think about cybersecurity, I think our minds always go towards the preventative component of it, right? Stopping the bad guys getting in. But what we need to understand is ransomware and cyber attacks are relentless, and it's not a one and done thing. These bad guys have an infinite number of attempts to get into your environment and only have to be right once to successfully get in and start wreaking havoc. Now, you guys, the good guys, on the other hand, you have to be 100% right 100% of the time in blocking those attempts. And we're human beings. We are not perfect. We are fallible, and sometimes this is just going to happen. Someone's going to get in and they're going to start wreaking havoc. And that's when you're going to turn to the backup component of your cybersecurity strategy. Okay, they've got in. They have locked down my data. How can I recover so I don't have to pay this ransom? And this is what this page is all about. I think I'm just going to talk about it off the top of my head. But the first piece is just understanding that the same concept of physical separation in our environments on premises applies to the cloud. It just works differently. We need to leverage logical separation and understand where those security boundaries are in the cloud. Now, for AWS, that's accounts. For Microsoft Azure, it's subscriptions. For Google Cloud, it's projects. But Veeam, we will always, what's the word that I'm looking for? We'll always promote the idea, that's a terrible way of describing it. We will always advocate, there we go, advocate for always having a dedicated account, subscription, or project for your backup data and having the least privilege access permissions to that account. And the reason why we do that is if someone were to successfully get into our production account and start deleting data or encrypting data, they're not going to find it very easy, or it might even be impossible, to jump the gap into the backup account and start encrypting that backup data as well. So that's the first line of it. That's the first piece we would advocate for: logical separation into different accounts, subscriptions, or projects, and then the least privilege access permissions to make sure that only the bare minimum number of permissions for that backup tool to perform its job are granted between production and backup. The next piece is going to be around a hot word on everyone's lips, which is around immutability. That is placing data in a write once, read many state. So once that backup has been committed to, let's just call it object storage, that backup cannot be changed, modified, deleted based on a specific time period that you set. So if ransomware were to get in, they are not going to be able to encrypt your data. And on the topic of encryption, I know it's table stakes, but encryption needs to be thought about seriously, because these ransomware attackers are starting to move towards data exfiltration. They're realizing that, hey, we're getting to the backup. They've locked it. We can't lock it. They're just recovering. We're not getting paid our ransom. Instead, I'm going to take this sensitive information, company secrets, personally identifiable information stored in these backups, and I'm just going to put it out over the web unless they pay me my ransom. So making sure that you also encrypt your data at rest, in flight, at rest again, is critical to making sure that these exfiltration attempts do not happen. So I would say that is my answer to one of the questions that came in earlier. And again, I forget who asked it. I apologize. But that is how backup really plays a role in cybersecurity. Leah, why don't you talk us through weighing flexibility versus efficiency and as a service?
Yes, quite the mouthful of a title. Well, I actually want to call back to something you said. Oh gosh, today is a day, guys. It's a Monday, and you do know that this is live because we continue to stumble. Something that Sam said earlier is talking about having this idea of portability, but ultimately why we have portability is that Veeam really takes a posture of having the least prescriptive methodology in the market, I would say. And obviously saying least prescriptive, that could absolutely sound like some sort of salesy message here. But what we're seeing in the market is that, a lot of organizations would love for us to have an easy button to make a simple solution that's simple to deploy and works for a very simple environment that they're uniquely asking us to back up. But what we find is that no two environments are alike. Again, the cloud is not this monolithic, perfect solution that works perfectly for everyone. So that means that we're really called upon to be as flexible as possible. And one of those key ways that we're asked to be flexible is sometimes an organization wants us to have a sort of as a service model. And then other times they really want to manage it themselves. They want that sort of flexibility. So it's all about balancing flexibility versus efficiencies. And so what I would recommend for those of you who are evaluating solutions out there would be to kind of weigh against two things. On the one side, you have a sort of as a service option. Now, that could mean that you go with a software as a service solution. It could mean that you look for a managed service provider to not only set it up for you, but manage the day-to-day. Ultimately, there's a lot of pros with that. You can implement it using best practices. Sometimes paying somebody else who's an expert at the thing is the best option. And so looking at as a service models inherently means that you're implementing a lot of best practices. It's freeing up staff time, especially for those who would have to architect and integrate and implement. Those folks have very valuable time, and you might need to spend that on other IT projects. The other thing that's nice about as a service is it can be incredibly predictable costs. The downside of that is it's all t-shirt sizing usually. It's a lot of very broad stroke sort of options. And a lot of the times you're not maximizing your cost with that. Because of that t-shirt sizing, they're having to account for a wide range of opportunities. And so it can be something that's maybe not managing your spend most effectively. So for those looking to really do it themselves because they recognize that their environment or their needs are unique, or that maybe they need to spend extra money on other projects that might be more strategic, Doing it yourself is absolutely an option, and Veeam is very easy to use overall in terms of its DNA. It's great, easy to understand workflows. It's a policy-based approach to backup. We have a lot of built-in integrations. We spend a lot of time working with the cloud providers, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, to integrate effectively into the solution rather than just saying, oh, well, we're flexible because we expose a bunch of APIs. Yes, we do that too, but we spend a lot of time to intelligently design so that you can really use the solutions for your own benefit. So it's maximizing that flexibility to meet your organizational needs. And ultimately, the Veeam team is here to help from setup. We have a lot of really great reference architectures and best practices. We have a great tech support team that's highly rated. We also curate an amazing community. The Veeam community is a great source to get a lot of these best practices and advice. We also work with a network of service providers, whether that's some of the main GSIs in the space for a lot of that setup and integration work. We have an incredible network of managed service providers, and we provide them with a lot of tools to help them offer services at scale. So whether you're looking for Veeam as a service or you're looking to manage it yourself, Veeam really has the flexibility to manage that effectively. I know we're running short on time, so Sam and I are going to do rapid fire for our final 3 questions. So one thing I wanted to mention is, and this is kind of fitting that we're having to rush through it, day 2 operations. I think a lot of folks never have time for day 2 operations. So one of our best pieces of advice would be do not skip on reporting. I mentioned earlier a scenario in which you might have a chief security officer ask, in the event of a ransomware attack, what percentage of our environment is recoverable? Veeam can offer that kind of reporting. Veeam can offer automated testing of backup recoverability. It can offer, what those RPOs are across all of your environments and a whole host of other services. There's also, as I said, a tremendous API framework for you to integrate and automate as much as possible so that you can really maximize the efficiency of your Veeam solution. Now, one of the most important things that I hope you're getting to take away from this discussion here is this idea that managing the sphere of control can be very hard when you have lots of point products, when the DBAs are doing their own thing and the data center team is doing their own thing. So having one area to go to for that hybrid cloud environment, it just means that you can do a lot of those day 2 operations more effectively. With that, Sam, I'm giving you just a couple of minutes. I think it's time for our last 2 best practices.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's see if I can do it in one breath. So I know there was a question around testing as well, and just some generic best practices around that. I'll also add some additional that's not on the screen. Firstly, build a comprehensive plan and update it regularly to account for the agility of the cloud, right? Leah discussed earlier around the nature of shadow IT, a business unit. All they need is an AWS account, Azure account, Google account, and a credit card, and boom, they can create a VM and a new application, and you know nothing about it. That also brings into question the importance of tagging as well and the right tagging culture, but just make sure that you have that plan and continue to update it regularly to make sure that you are accounting for each and every single workload. If there is a workload, it needs to be protected. It is probably serving some sort of business function. Next is evaluate recovery times against your service level objectives. As part of testing, you can do this through an automated fashion. You can do it like a manual fashion, sitting around a table during a true DR test. But any mismatch in terms of what was my achievable recovery time and what was I needing as part of my service level objective must be addressed. Now, you can do that by optimizing the solution that you have, maybe throwing more compute, more RAM, more storage at it. It might be that tool just doesn't meet your needs and you'd have to select a new tool, but just evaluate those times. And then finally, don't forget about the people. Practice. Even if you are doing an automated test, maybe you're orchestrating the recovery of something, practice to build that muscle memory. So the time that you experience a real world event isn't the first time. Your adrenaline's going to be pumping, nerves are going to be high, people are likely shouting at you, where is my application, where is my data? You don't want that to inhibit your ability to do a successful recovery on time. By practicing it, you build that muscle memory, and then you're more confident when you actually do the real world thing. And then finally is around being cost conscious and optimized. So making sure that you utilize planners, calculators to proactively understand all of the different things that you can be charged for in the cloud: compute, network, storage, API costs. Understanding that, if not proactively calculating it or planning it, is going to help you alleviate that bill shock. You get the bill at the end of the month and you're like, I'm spending how much? I've seen organizations spending tens and tens of thousands every single month on things like snapshots in the cloud. That doesn't have to happen if you are cost conscious and you optimize for that. Next up is analyzing performance, usage, and capacity patterns, and then making sure that you right-size the instances that you're using accordingly. So if you have a very, very low performance hungry application, that you're not throwing like a T3XL instance at it, that you're using something that's a little bit better sized for that. And then any unused resources, power them down or delete them, because these are all impacting your bill, just to make sure that, again, you keep those costs low. And then the final one is just understand all of the different storage options that you have available in the cloud, and making sure that as data protection data, backup data ages, tier it across those. I'm going to use AWS because I live in AWS, but a snapshot, your first line of defense, is 5 cents per gig per month. You can halve that just by putting it in the highest performance tier of Amazon S3, which is just 2.3 cents per gig per month, and still have pretty good recovery time objectives. And as that data ages, but you still need to keep it because of retention requirements, throw it in something as cold as Amazon S3 Glacier Deep Archive. You're now talking fractions of a cent per gig per month. You can still meet your retention requirements without completely blowing up your budget on something as fun and exciting as backup. I put us a minute over, and I think that might be because we tried to get through all of your questions. At least I hope so. Any questions?
Almost everything, Sam. That was incredible. That conversation was, I was smiling and laughing along with you the entire time. And to the audience out there, we had planned to do a little bit of a Q&A session, but you were all asking such great questions along the way that we did a little back end pivot, and Leah and Sam just got through everything as we went. So that was incredible. Leah, Sam, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for everyone joining us today.
All right. Well, on that note, I hope that everyone out there is feeling as lit up right now as I am. I know that was just a fascinating conversation to be a part of. And I'm seeing lots of high fives coming in from the audience here. Thank you, Satyam and Tyler. I love that. And it really, this was a great example today of what the conversation that can happen when everybody's so engaged and interactive. Sarah, thank you to you as well. All right. Well, I know that a few of you, even though most of us are sitting here still kind of digging through all this wonderful information we just got, a few of you have already fast forwarded to what's up next, which is our $300 Amazon gift card. So I am going to go ahead and give that prize away. We are today's winner. Now, I'm reminding you one more time, you do need to be here live present at this incredible webinar in order to win. And our winner of a $300 Amazon gift card is Joseph Fergalt of California. Joseph Fergalt of California. Congratulations to you, Joseph. But hey, aren't we all winners today at such an awesome session? I think we've really all won. And I see Joseph has just sent a message. So you're here, you're present. That's great, Joseph. We will follow up with you after we wrap up today. I'm seeing a few questions still come in. If you did have questions that we didn't get to, feel free to send them in, and we will make sure that they get to Leah, to Sam, to the Veeam team. So please do get those questions in. I do want to remind you one more time to head on over to that handouts tab, get that hybrid cloud backup for dummies, the 2023 Cloud Protection Trends Report, #1 hybrid cloud backup guide, MIT Technology Review e-brief, hybrid cloud wins rely in data protection, the 451 research report, Veeam builds momentum of cloud and SaaS backup growth. All of those are incredible resources, incredible takeaways from our webinar today. So please do make sure you've downloaded those and take them with you before you head out today. And with that, boy, I tell you, that is just a fantastic way to start out a week. I'm in a great mood. I'm smiling from ear to ear. I hope you all are as well. And I want to extend, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, a big thank you to Veeam for making this entire webinar possible. An absolutely giant thank you with rainbows and unicorns all around it, as Leah said, for both Leah and Sam for leading us in such an engaging and insightful conversation today. And I want to send some really big high fives and special thank yous to all of you who are here with us today. I know we went a little bit over time, so thank you for sticking around. This webinar is again, such a great example of the types of conversations we can have when we are able to interact, to engage, to explore some of these things together. Mike, thank you to you as well. I'm still seeing high fives and thank yous coming in. I love that. I'm glad you guys got so much out of the conversation today. I know I learned a ton. And you know what? I hope that I get to see all of you on a webinar again soon. And until that happens, I hope you have an absolutely beautiful end to your day.